Nearly 60% of the world's agricultural produce is harvested during the spring-summer season, making it one of the most explosive production periods on the planet, with a total trade value exceeding $2 trillion each year, where vast fields operate like giant biological production lines, constantly accelerating. So what enables these fields, in just a few short months, to generate over 6 billion tons of crops at such an extraordinary pace, despite harsh weather and natural risks? Today, join Agriculture Insight as we journey across vast farmlands around the world, where spring and summer awaken the full potential of the land. Discover how every sprout is timed with precision, harvested down to the hour, and transformed into exceptional output within a limited window of time. Let's begin. At the first stop, we arrive at asparagus, one of the fastest-growing crops of the spring-summer season. With global production exceeding 9 million tons and a market value of over $25 billion each year. From March to June in California, asparagus harvest reaches its peak. After just one warm night, shoots can grow an additional 5 to 7 centimeters, forcing farmers to track them hour by hour. They bend low, slide long blades deep to the base, and make a clean, precise cut to preserve tenderness and crispness, because even a delay of a few hours can cause the stalk to toughen and lose its value. But here a paradox emerges. Despite its rapid growth, green asparagus remains a relatively common vegetable with modest value. And then, a single factor changes the entire game: light. From the same plant variety, white asparagus is harvested in a completely different world. Long rows stretching hundreds of meters are covered with black plastic sheets, keeping the young shoots buried beneath the soil in complete darkness. When harvesting begins, specialized machines move along the rows at speeds of about 3 to 5 kilometers per hour, lifting the covers and processing the soil section by section. Sensor systems precisely locate the hidden shoots below, guiding blades down to the exact base and cutting them in conditions where direct visibility is nearly non-existent. In Europe, especially in Germany and France, white asparagus was once called white gold, priced 2 to 3 times higher than green asparagus, and at times even placed alongside caviar on the tables of the aristocracy. After harvesting, asparagus is transported to pre-processing facilities within 2 to 4 hours to minimize moisture loss and preserve its natural crispness. At the facility, the spears pass through high-pressure washing systems to remove soil and debris, then move on to automated sorting lines where optical sensors classify them by diameter and length. For white asparagus, the outer layer is typically peeled thinly to ensure a consistently tender texture. Finally, the product is rapidly cooled to around 2 to 40 Celsius, sealed in packaging, and placed into a continuous cold chain, ready for export or distribution to high-end markets. As one of the most characteristic crops of the spring-summer season, peas have not only helped reshape humanity's protein intake for centuries, but also generate a global economic value of over $36 billion each year. Around late May, as temperate climates shift from the end of spring into early summer, pea fields across France enter peak harvest. Unlike manual picking row by row, industrial pea harvesting is essentially a mobile processing line operating directly in the field. As the pea viner moves forward at around 5 kilometers per hour, its low-mounted intake gently gathers entire plants into the machine. Within seconds, high-speed threshing drums begin separating pods from stems, while multi-stage vibrating screens immediately return leaves and vines back to the field, retaining a nearly pure stream of clean green peas. Inside the machine, enclosed conveyors continue operating at capacities of up to 100 to 200 tons of plants per hour, lifting the peas into onboard storage before transferring them directly into trucks moving alongside. The entire process unfolds at such an urgent pace that freezing facilities almost have to wait for the fields, because within just 1 to 2 hours after harvest, the peas must enter processing lines to preserve their natural sweetness, which begins to decline the moment they are detached from the plant. In modern facilities, the entire bean processing workflow is almost fully automated. Upon arrival, the beans pass through multi-stage washing systems using recirculated cold water, combined with vortex flows or rotating drums, to remove soil, sand, and impurities without damaging the beans. Next, they move across vibrating screens and are sorted using optical sensors, which eliminate empty, damaged, or foreign materials. The qualified stream is then rapidly blanched at 90 to 95 degrees for several dozen seconds, followed by immediate cooling before entering IQF freezing. Finally, the beans are sealed in packaging and transferred into a continuous cold chain. During World War II, the British government issued urgent warnings after many people accidentally consumed toxic rhubarb leaves during periods of food shortage. Yet, on the very same plant, the stalks carry a sharp, refreshing tartness, distinct enough to turn rhubarb into one of the most sought-after dessert ingredients in Europe every summer. From March to May, when rhubarb plants rise to about 40 to 60 centimeters above soil that often remains below 10 degrees Celsius, the harvest season officially begins, so early that in many temperate regions, it is considered the first true signal that spring has returned. Harvesters do not start with knives. Instead, they gently twist and pull each stalk from the base, allowing the plant to regenerate through multiple cycles within the same season, a traditional technique that has endured for centuries. The toxic leaves are then carefully removed right in the field, leaving behind crisp red stalks with a clean, tart flavor, the most valuable part of the plant. In the Yorkshire rhubarb triangle, rhubarb is not harvested under sunlight, but in near total darkness inside forcing sheds. Even a few minutes of strong light can toughen the stalks and reduce their natural sweetness. Few crops in the world must be harvested in darkness to preserve their flavor, making each rhubarb season here feel more like an agricultural ritual than a conventional harvest. Rhubarb is already on the table, and strawberries are an essential pairing, a classic duo in Western cuisine, especially in the UK, France, and North America. And right as rhubarb enters its harvest season, strawberry fields burst into full ripeness, triggering an urgent race to pick them at peak sweetness before they begin to deteriorate just hours after being removed from the plant. Despite the deep reach of mechanization in modern agriculture, over 90% of the world's strawberries are still harvested entirely by hand. On California farms during peak season, hundreds of workers move steadily along the rows, bent low for hours in a near-synchronized rhythm. Each berry is handled with precision, gently holding the stem, twisting the wrist to detach it without tearing the flesh, then placing it immediately into shallow trays to avoid bruising. Harvesters must quickly assess color and firmness to select fruit at the optimal stage, since strawberries barely continue to ripen after being picked. As soon as they leave the field, the berries are sent straight to collection points, where solar-powered canopies supply energy for cooling fans that rapidly bring temperatures down to around 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. From there, they enter the cold chain within just 1 to 2 hours to preserve freshness and natural flavor. Within hours of harvest, trays of dew-kissed red strawberries move into high-pressure washing lines and slide into high-speed processing systems, where they are swiftly transformed into thick strawberry jam, IQF frozen berries, and countless products that appear on the tables of millions every day. A short journey that ultimately defines the entire value of the harvest. Once considered a dangerous food in 16th century Europe, believed to cause emotional disturbances, artichokes have since become one of the most nutrient-rich vegetables of the Mediterranean region. In their growth cycle, artichokes can be cultivated year-round in cool climates, but the spring-summer season is the most critical for yield, when plants grow vigorously and buds reach their highest uniformity. In contrast, winter's low temperatures slow development, forcing growers to trade off between quantity and quality. California, which supplies about 99% of the United States' commercial artichoke production, sees its harvest begin in late February, accelerate through March to May, and continue intermittently until around August. What makes artichokes unique is how they're harvested. Instead of mechanization, workers carry a roughly 20-kilogram bag on their backs, move along straight rows, and use a precise wrist-twisting motion to snap the bud at the stem's natural breaking point, cleanly removing the harvest while leaving the plant intact to support subsequent buds. Although most artichokes are still picked by hand, some farms have begun testing harvesting machines. These systems use cameras to identify mature buds, then deploy gripping arms to position on the stem and apply a gentle twisting motion to detach the bud directly from the plant. Despite this level of innovation, the technology has yet to see widespread adoption, largely because artichoke buds do not ripen uniformly, and even the slightest surface damage can significantly reduce their market value. At the processing facility, artichokes are washed under high-pressure water to remove soil and debris, then trimmed and stripped of their tougher outer leaves. The tender core is handled quickly to prevent oxidation before moving through blanching, cooling, and finally either canning or freezing for long-term preservation. For many crops, the spring-summer season may be just one of several harvest windows. But for tomatoes, it's the true red-golden season, when this period alone can account for up to 70% of the annual yield, delivering a flavor that is richer, sweeter, and more balanced than at any other time of year. As the machine enters the rows, its front conveyor lowers and slides neatly beneath the canopy to lift entire clusters, while a precisely calibrated shaking system allows ripe fruits to detach naturally from the stems without losing their firmness. At the rear, a strong yet carefully controlled airflow removes leaves and damaged fruits, leaving a continuous stream of red tomatoes with a capacity of up to 15 tons per hour. But in open field cultivation, tomatoes face a major challenge. They tend to ripen in waves rather than uniformly, are highly prone to bruising, and remain heavily dependent on weather conditions. That's where robots come in. On modern farms focused on quality instead of mass cutting, advanced harvesting systems use high-resolution cameras to continuously scan each row, analyzing color and ripeness in real time. Robotic arms move to precisely identified points, approaching each fruit with carefully controlled gripping force, gentle enough to avoid even the slightest surface deformation. Each tomato is individually selected, detached from the stem, and placed onto the conveyor in what feels like an almost invisible motion. Regardless of the harvesting method, every batch of tomatoes is immediately transported to processing facilities, where they are cleaned and transformed into countless staple products of the global food industry. Unlike original maize varieties, sweet corn is actually the result of a genetic mutation that appeared by chance more than 1,000 years ago in the Americas. From what was once a biological accident, it has grown into one of the defining crops of the spring-summer season, generating nearly $9 billion each year. In Wisconsin, the sweet corn harvest typically begins right at the milk stage, when each kernel is still soft, juicy, and packed with its highest natural sugar content. At the front of the field, the harvester's intake lowers close to the stalks, lifting entire rows into a specialized snapping unit. Within seconds, the ears are cleanly detached from the plants while retaining their protective husks, then carried continuously onto rear conveyors at a capacity of around 10 to 20 tons per hour. From there, they are discharged straight into transport trucks, forming a fully integrated harvesting chain right in the middle of the field. Speed is critical because within just hours after being picked, the sugars inside the kernels begin converting into starch. That's why, upon arrival at the processing facility, the corn immediately passes through high-speed rubber rollers that strip away husks and silks in seconds, before entering production lines for frozen corn, corn soup, canned products, and a wide range of convenient foods found on tables around the world. In late-season apple orchards, when the trees stand nearly bare, and only thousands of fruits remain densely hanging from the branches, it is not a sign of neglect, but the true peak of the harvest. These apples are deliberately left on the tree longer, to reach full maturity, allowing sugar levels to rise to around 16 degrees Brix, significantly higher than early harvests, and enough to determine their entire value in processing. The tree has largely stopped producing leaves, and redirects all the energy accumulated throughout the season into the fruit. The result is not only a deeper sweetness, but also maximum size and weight, pushing yields to around 60 tons per hectare. In industrial agriculture, this is no longer about appearance. It becomes a calculation of how much sugar can be extracted per square meter of land. That is why these apples rarely appear on premium fresh fruit shelves. Left too long, they lose their crispness, their skin becomes less perfect, and they bruise more easily. But in return, they offer what truly matters: high and stable sugar content. This is also why most of the harvest is directed straight into processing: juice, cider, or vinegar, where flavor is defined by intensity, not appearance. The entire orchard is typically harvested within a short window of 2 to 3 weeks, when all fruits reach their optimal state. Apples are either hand-picked or mechanically shaken down, then quickly transported into processing lines before the sugars begin to degrade. With nearly 50% healthy fats and a substantial amount of protein, pistachios, often seen as a premium snack, are in fact a concentrated source of energy that once sustained entire civilizations across the arid regions of the Middle East for thousands of years. Each year, the world produces over 1 million tons of pistachios, mainly from the United States, Iran, and Turkey. The harvest season runs from August to October, when the outer hull turns pink and naturally splits, a clear sign of full ripeness. On large farms in California, high-powered shaker machines can strip a tree in seconds, allowing tens of tons to be collected in a single day. But speed is critical. Within 24 hours, the soft outer hull must be removed to prevent fermentation. The nuts are then washed, sorted, and dried. Unlike many other nuts, fresh pistachios are more perishable, closer to a fresh fruit with a hard shell than a long-lasting dry nut. Once processed, pistachios develop their signature crunch with a light buttery flavor and a subtle natural sweetness. And it is precisely this balance that makes them the soul of baklava, where finely ground pistachios are layered between dozens of thin sheets of dough, then baked with butter and honey to create a crisp, deeply sweet, and energy-rich dessert that has endured for centuries. Living in a country where nearly 1/3 of the territory is deadly desert and billions of tons of sand are swallowing farmland every year, China has created an unprecedented miracle, planting more than 66 billion trees to transform some of the harshest lands on Earth into a billion-dollar agricultural ecosystem. This is not only a battle against desertification, but also an effort to revive deserts into massive green oases, where farms, modern solar power plants, and new cities grow together. So how were Chinese farmers able to turn dead land into places producing millions of tons of food every year? Join Agriculture Insight as we explore the story behind this extraordinary achievement. China did not conquer the desert because it was easy. They did it because there was no other choice. The greatest paradox of Western China is that the place harsh enough to challenge every limit of cultivation is also the very place this nation of 1.4 billion people must connect at all costs. But why is that? Stretching from the Gobi Desert to the Taklamakan Desert, China possesses one of the largest arid belts in the world, with total desert and desertified land reaching nearly 2.6 million square kilometers, equal to 4 times the size of Texas. Some areas receive less than 100 millimeters of rainfall per year, with extreme day-to-night temperature swings of nearly 80 degrees Celsius, while sandstorms bury roads within hours. But the greatest threat was not that the desert existed, but that it kept expanding. For decades, sand continuously advanced into farmland, villages, and northern economic corridors, creating massive dust storms that reached as far as Beijing, South Korea, and the skies of East Asia every spring. However, in the land where many nations saw nothing but hot, useless sand, Beijing saw vast land reserves, thousands of sunshine hours each year, and nearly limitless solar energy potential. Beneath that sand also lay more than 16 billion tons of oil, 16 trillion cubic meters of natural gas, along with minerals and a strategic corridor linking China with the rest of Central Asia. In other words, this was not just a desert, it was a colossal energy vault locked away by geography. At the same time, it was strategic land capable of absorbing population pressure, becoming a vital link in China's ambition to compete for global leadership. That is why China launched an unprecedented greening campaign, stopping desertification, channeling water across arid land, then transforming nearly 65,000 square kilometers of some of the most barren terrain into green oases capable of producing more than 30 million tons of agricultural products every year. And to understand how such a miracle could exist, we must begin with the first step, forcing billions of tons of sand to stand still before planting the very first seed. This battle did not begin with trees, but with understanding how the desert moves. Across the Taklamakan Desert, survey teams were deployed for months, using high-resolution satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and thousands of wind measurements to analyze sand movement patterns, wind speed, and the terrain structure beneath the surface. The goal was not simply to observe the desert, but to read how it operates. Once the dynamic mapping was completed, the first step began: leveling the desert. Hundreds of bulldozers and heavy machines were deployed to cut down high dunes, move and redistribute enormous volumes of sand into lower areas, creating a relatively flat and uniform surface. This was not an immediate process of building farmland, but of removing extreme terrain instability, turning a chaotic environment into ground stable enough for human intervention. Only then did the sand control phase truly begin. And the real line of defense came from a solution that seemed primitive: dry straw. Tens of millions of tons of post-harvest straw from nearby agricultural regions were collected, compressed into bales, then transported by trucks and freight trains to the desert edge. There, it was cut into sections around 20 to 30 centimeters long, deep enough to anchor into the sand while still maintaining stable grip on the surface. Across thousands of square kilometers of scorching sand, workers inserted bundles of straw into the desert surface, forming a regular grid of squares measuring about 1 meter on each side. This structure, commonly known as the checkerboard barrier, became one of the most effective sand control systems ever deployed on a large scale anywhere in the world. When wind races close to the ground, this is where it carries the most sand. But when it strikes these small straw grids, the airflow is split, slowed, and loses kinetic energy. Sand particles that were moving begin to fall, trapped inside each square instead of continuing onward. After weeks, millions of small cells connect into one enormous mesh, turning a constantly shifting ocean of sand into a more stable surface. But the real importance of this system was not only keeping sand in place. It also reduced water evaporation, retained moisture more effectively, and created microclimates mild enough for drought-resistant shrubs to take root. That was the first turning point of the entire project. The checkerboard locked sand on the surface, but to keep the desert stable for years, China needed a stronger biological defensive line to hold the sand from below. From large-scale nurseries built along the desert edge, tens of millions of young seedlings, after being cared for through the earliest stage of life, were transported into the open sands. In many areas, each planting pit was dug by farmers to a depth of around 40 to 80 centimeters, allowing roots to reach the more stable sand layers below. What made this process different was that the bottom of each pit was then filled with 5 to 15 kilograms of organic fertilizer, moisture-retaining materials, and biological mulch to reduce water loss during the early stage. Once the seedlings were placed into the ground, drip irrigation systems delivered water directly to the root zone at a flow rate of only around 2 to 8 liters per hour, instead of wetting the entire surface like traditional flood irrigation. By sending water precisely where the plant needed it most, this method could reduce water use by roughly 30 to 60%, a critical factor in places where every drop was once considered a luxury. Most ordinary plant species would die within weeks from desert heat shock, so saxaul, tamarisk, drought-tolerant poplar, and many native shrubs were prioritized for their ability to survive the harshest conditions. But once the first roots penetrated deep into the ground, the balance began to shift. Roots bound loose sand particles together, trunks broke the wind, canopies retained moisture, and fallen leaves gradually created organic matter on the surface. Season after season, places once covered by bare sand began to form living soil. The first years were the most difficult stage, when seedling mortality rates in many areas could reach as high as 80%. Caused by a single major windstorm or one extreme summer. That is why China invested around 14 billion USD across multiple phases of national anti-desertification programs, while total maintenance costs are estimated to have exceeded 50 billion USD from 1978 to today. Few countries have attempted environmental restoration on this scale. More than 66 billion trees have been planted over decades, alongside over 500,000 kilometers of green belts, shelter forests, and new vegetation spreading along the edges of the largest deserts. From this point on, the battle was no longer only about surviving a brutal ocean of sand. It was about turning the desert into a new food machine of the 21st century. Once the sand was locked down, water was delivered, and the soil began to recover. The remote western deserts of China, such as Xinjiang, Ningxia, Gansu, and Inner Mongolia, were becoming one of the agricultural centers, contributing more than 30 million tons of farm products every year. One of the most striking examples is grapes. In Turpan, where there are more than 3,000 hours of sunshine each year, and extremely large day-night temperature differences, grapevines accumulate up to 40% more sugar than in typical temperate regions. Unlike traditional cultivation, many vineyards here use elevated trellis systems, precision drip irrigation, and the technique of burying grapevines underground during winter to protect them from severe cold. As a result, this area alone produces nearly 1.5 million tons of fresh grapes and 350,000 tons of raisins each year, making it one of the largest high-quality raising centers in Asia. China did not stop at food alone. It also made the barren desert begin to bloom. In the arid regions of Gansu and Ningxia, thousands of hectares of industrial roses have been planted for essential oil, rose tea, cosmetics, and dried petals. The dry climate helps reduce fungal disease, while intense sunlight increases essential oil concentration in the petals. For some rose varieties, it takes 3 to 5 tons of fresh petals to distill just 1 kilogram of essential oil, making the value of each hectare far higher than many traditional food crops. That turns roses into an ideal choice for lands with scarce water but a need for high economic return. But among the many high-value crops grown in these regions, none has transformed the desert economy more powerfully than cotton. Xinjiang currently produces around 5 million tons of cotton each year, equal to roughly 20% of global cotton output. Vast land allows large-scale mechanization with giant harvesters, while drip irrigation significantly reduces water costs. As a result, Xinjiang cotton remains highly competitive on international markets, putting pressure on many traditional cotton-growing regions, such as the United States. However, along with the low-cost advantage comes prolonged international controversy. Many Western governments and human rights organizations accuse part of the cotton supply chain in Xinjiang of involving forced labor or labor linked to detention systems. China rejects these accusations. But regardless of the controversy, one fact cannot be denied. Cotton has transformed former desert land into a major link in the global textile supply chain. To produce year-round in the middle of scorching sand, China needed to go even further, building modern greenhouse empires in the heart of the desert. Today, the arid western regions of China alone are estimated to possess more than 2,000 square kilometers of agricultural greenhouses, an area roughly 3 times larger than the entire greenhouse area of Canada. The most common type today is the northern Chinese solar greenhouse, a model specially optimized for cold and arid regions. The entire southern side is covered with transparent materials to capture maximum sunlight, while the northern side is a thick wall made of brick, rammed earth, or concrete, capable of absorbing heat during the day and slowly releasing it at night. This mechanism turns desert sunlight itself into a natural heating system. In winter, many greenhouses can maintain inside temperatures 10 to 20 degrees Celsius higher than outside without consuming excessive fuel. Alongside them are low-cost plastic tunnel greenhouses for rapid area expansion, as well as advanced smart greenhouses equipped with temperature, humidity, and carbon dioxide sensors, plus automated control systems. Inside these greenhouses, the main crops are tomatoes, strawberries, cucumbers, sweet peppers, premium leafy greens, and melons. Many facilities use growing substrates instead of soil, together with fertigation systems that deliver water and nutrients directly to the roots. As a result, greenhouse strawberry yields can reach 60 to 100 tons per hectare, 4 times higher than traditional open-field cultivation. Many areas along the edges of the Gobi Desert and the Taklamakan Desert possess a rare advantage, nearly endless sunlight. So China quickly turned this enormous free resource into power plants in the middle of the Sand Sea. At the edge of the Gobi Desert, one of the most striking symbols is a concentrated solar thermal complex using an energy tower around 260 meters tall, surrounded by approximately 12,000 giant heliostat mirrors. During the day, the entire mirror field rotates in sync with the movement of the sun and focuses light onto the top of the central tower. The heat generated is enough to raise molten salt to hundreds of degrees Celsius, which is then used to create steam that spins electricity-generating turbines. The plant is designed to produce around 390 million kilowatt-hours of electricity per year, enough to power hundreds of thousands of households. In the Kabuki Desert, the scene becomes even more spectacular. 196,000 solar panels arranged in the shape of a giant galloping horse, covering more than 15 million square feet. One of the world's greatest energy landmarks. During the 2010 to 2020 period, the energy ecology model in Kabuki Desert was estimated to generate around $10 billion in economic value from electricity, land restoration, jobs, and new infrastructure. But China did not stop at generating power. In many areas, solar farms are also combined with sheep grazing, creating a two-layer value model on the same land area. Raised solar panels create shade, helping reduce surface temperatures, limit water evaporation, and allow weeds or drought-resistant plants to grow better underneath. Sheep are then released to naturally control vegetation, reducing mechanical mowing costs while creating additional income from meat, milk, or wool. That turns 1 square meter of desert into land capable of producing electricity, animal feed, and livestock at the same time. Once electricity, water, and land had been brought under control, the desert no longer determined the limits of production. Even aquaculture could be developed in places once considered dead land, with output reaching nearly 200,000 tons per year. Lined ponds, water recirculation systems, and solar-powered oxygen pumps allow tilapia, carp, shrimp, and many freshwater species to grow in the middle of water-scarce regions. After harvest, nutrient-rich water containing nitrogen and organic matter from the ponds is reused to irrigate vegetables, orchards, and grazing fields, significantly reducing the need for chemical fertilizers. However, along with great potential comes serious concerns and risks. Desert aquaculture requires strict control of water quality, disease, and energy costs. Otherwise, the production advantage can quickly disappear. In the end, China did not just green the desert. It made electricity create water, raise fish, and post-culture water feed crops, completing the largest closed-loop desert ecosystem in history. However, this effort has so far restored only around 19% of China's total 2.6 million square kilometers of desert and desertified land, showing that most of these arid regions will remain a long-term challenge for decades to come. And in the 21st century, in your view, will the leading nation be the one that controls the most resources, or the one that knows how to turn dead land into new power? But if China is turning deserts into endless green, then the nations of the Middle East are also using technology to write an impossible story of their own, harvesting 150 million tons of agricultural products from lands once considered hopeless.